We move to today's panel discussion titled From Prediction to Policy in AI, Climate Risk, and Global Readiness. This panel brings together Dr. Parag Khanna, founder and CEO of AlphaGeo, a leading global strategy advisor, best-selling author of 7 books, and one of the world's foremost thinkers on geopolitics and climate adaptation. We're also honored that he is an ADIA Lab Fellow. Posey, HPC Program Manager, ESM and CFD domains, NVIDIA, who manages NVIDIA's strategy for applications and solutions development in the domains of Earth system science and computational fluid dynamics. Dr. Adam Schlosser, Senior Research Scientist and Deputy Director, MIT Center for Sustainability Science and Strategy, a leading thinning in the integrated modeling of natural, managed and built systems to inform global sustainability strategies. And our moderator, Lucia Fuselli, climate finance and sustainability expert on energy transition, climate mitigation, and adaptation. Please join me in welcoming our panelist and moderator to the stage.
Good afternoon and welcome to our closing panel. Today's session showed us how AI and data science are unlocking a new era of climate intelligence. But we now face a critical scenario. How do we ensure these advantages guide more robust policies and actionable investment decisions? So before we dive into our main questions, I'd like to ask each of you to quickly share the main takeaway from your breakout session. The audience had a tough time choosing from one of the 3 sessions, so this will help us all get a sense of the impactful discussion that took place in each. So Dr. Khanna, let's start with you. What was the central message from your session on climate resilience and adaptation analytics?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. And we had a lot of complementarity across the presentations in our session. We certainly all agree that adaptation is a co-equal policy priority today. There was some enthusiasm, I might say, given the view that the largest, most capitally endowed firms in the world are willing to take on this challenge, are deploying their resources, their technologies, their capabilities to promote climate adaptation, to do so in a way that might simultaneously achieve the objectives of decarbonization and maintaining economic growth while decoupling it from environmental impact. So I think that was very positive. But also the importance of sensitivity to regional differentiation. And we certainly see that across whether it is the climate effects in the Arab world or in what some call the global south, developing regions versus other regions of the world. And clearly models need to account for those local adaptation priorities and to implement them in a way that's going to really take into account the regional and local challenges. So those are kind of that's a quick summary of our very, very rich session.
Thank you, Dr. Khanna. Now over to Mr. Posey. Your key takeaway.
Yes, thank you. There were several themes in our session. I'll just touch on a few highlights, though, please. First of all, the reason that we still rely on the physics models is because they're proven, they preserve the laws of physics, conservation, and so on, but they're very expensive, and everyone's acknowledged that. And what we really need from them is higher resolution than we have today, which just brings on more problems of HPC, inefficiency, power consumption, et cetera. On the other hand, the full emulation approach of AI helps break down those barriers of HPC efficiency, yet there's still some areas where it can't quite provide the predictions we need. Extreme weather events are one, for example. So what's really important here is to find a way to avoid compromise and come up with strategic integration of the two, the physics and AI, to achieve our goals. Various proposals are available for that. There's still uncertainty about what will be the best direction, but we're all making investments in the research to try and get there. I would say that was our primary. I'll also add another that we all consider weather to be very advanced in AI emulation, even moving now towards operational deployment at several large centers. But, and it seems that the data that we need exist today, but for climate it's a completely different story. And still the data is not available, and there's work to be done there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. Dr. Schlosser, your take.
Yeah, thank you. First, it's a privilege to represent our breakout session, and I would say that our session was probably very distinctly unique from the other two in that we had a very eclectic yet very broad range of perspectives amongst the three speakers, and it's going to be hard to express sort of a consensus of what we came to, but I will say this, that the talks really spanned across everything from short-term, sort of the challenges and opportunities and short-term prediction, which Luca presented, and I would say I'm a kindred spirit to Luca in that in a prior life, prior to MIT, I worked at NASA and worked at the Hydrologic Research Center, and a lot of the satellite information that Luca highlighted is really, I think, sort of the real opportunities for the short-term prediction advances. On the flip side, I sit in very much of a longer-term horizons. Again, I work with integrated models that bring in socioeconomics, deal with sort of large policy mechanisms. And there, the challenge really is about the lack of data that we have, not just in terms of the models themselves, but it's all about feedbacks in those types of models. And it's in that area where there's some real opportunities for data to help. There's certainly a wealth of data in the open science arena, but as I spoke with others in the session afterwards, I think there's a real missing opportunity here for academics and industry to come together and to try to share data, particularly in the proprietary data spectrum. I think those are where I think there are going to be some really important nuggets, not only in just building models to the points just made, but also are there opportunities for AI and emulators. And lastly, Jack, who I think all of you know here, I think he's been here before in prior symposiums, he had us all really thinking about, even as a computational scientist, how do you actually represent a number in a high-performance computing system? There's levels of precision that are actually quite critical, not only in the calculations you make, but in the performance of the computational systems. And I'll just say, I direct the high-performance computing system of our labs, I really began to appreciate how we can rethink not only the systems that we use and develop, but the models we use, the computations that are actually done in the models, and the levels of precision we really need to get at not just the deterministic predictions that I think a lot of you were able to appreciate in the plenary sessions this morning, but how do we think critically about making probabilistic forecasts of these longer-term horizons and how they weave into the policy arena. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schlosser. So, Dr. Khanna, your talk highlighted the need to quantify and possibly monetize resilience through AI-powered geospatial metrics, essentially treating adaptation as a form of Darwinian survival. You argued this data can drive smarter investment allocation, including climate-adjusted valuation. But what's holding government and investors back currently from integrating that resilience scoring into risk pricing and asset management? What could unlock a broader adoption of AI-driven adaptation analytics like the ones AlphaGeo is building?
Thank you so much for the question. My answer actually builds directly on what Adam was saying. He used the key term integrated model. You know, and there's a big gap there when we want to build interdisciplinary models with the appropriate feedback loops and weights between what happens in the climate and what happens in the real economy. And especially if we're going to do so in a very rapid and recursive way. In fact, you wind up not necessarily building long-term probabilistic models, but something that's actually more dynamic because of all the feedback loops. And we're trying to, in a way, step into that process where we're basically trying to get the financial sector and get governments to act according to future forecasts to then, of course, change their own trajectory in terms of the what climate models are forecasting for impact on certain geographies. And in doing so, it becomes more important in a way to look at the short-term benefits, not at the expense of the long term, but in order to change the long term. Because in a way, what has hindered the private sector, at least from investing, is that climate impacts have been seen as long term. And even as that horizon has started to come closer and they start to see that this is not only a statistical fat tail post 2050, it's rather something that's more immediate, they still haven't been able to price that impact. So that's where we've stepped in and tried to, again, directionally and probabilistic, and I think this is where Adam's point is crucial. This is not about being exactly precise, because you're literally changing the target by way of intervening, right? What we've tried to do, though, is to come up with directional pricing around things like insurance, things like electricity costs, and the key pain points of operational, CapEx and OpEx expenditures, whether it's for governments or for the private sector, in order to get them to see it. And there is, of course, in a way, a precursor or an analog to this that everyone remembers, which is when air pollution in China was very bad, 15, 20 years ago. And it took a number of studies from multilaterals that pointed to the GDP impact of air pollution by way the transmission mechanism being worker productivity and so on. And that was one of the key moments that spurred the Chinese government into action. And what we want to achieve is something similar when it comes to assessing climate physical impact. Now, again, the data is becoming more and more available, and it is things like the biannual assessments of annual uncovered insurance liability payouts and so on. And so armed with that kind of data, we're starting to see a lot more proactive action being taken.
Thank you. Stan, NVIDIA's work on AI-enhanced climate modeling, including kilometer-scale simulation and digital twin frameworks, open door for highly localized forecasts as unprecedented scales. So how close are we to making those tools actionable for asset managers, insurers, urban planners, or infrastructure investors? Can Earth digital twins meaningfully inform climate stress testing for portfolio, or are there still major barriers to adoption?
Thank you. Well, first I'd like to say that NVIDIA has business thrust in many directions, all right, R2 being one of those. And the focus there is software development, and we're guided by the community, especially on the science side. Domain science, I should say. And infrastructure is a really big part of what we develop as a company. Not so much on the R2 focus, but as a company. But what seems to be the gap, in my view, is this taking the models that we've developed on the domain side and then connecting those to impact and actionable models on the economic side. We've got this environment that can manage all the models of different formats and disciplines, and you mentioned multidisciplinary, but that connector between the physical model and the economic impact is still something that needs more work. NVIDIA is making investments there, but again, we need guidance from the community to go forward. That's really our focus here, is partnerships to make those things happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Adam, you emphasized the value of integrated models that link climate physics to socioeconomic outcomes. This, of course, could help investors evaluate decarbonization pathways, project sector-specific climate risk, and assess long-term sustainability strategies. But many institutional investors still struggle to translate complex climate models into decision-relevant metrics. In your view, what will take to bridge the gap between the model advancement and investor usability? How do we ensure this work becomes effectively accessible by portfolio strategists and infrastructure planners?
Thanks. And it's so, I'm benefited by the fact that I'm the third person to answer a question because I get the knowledge from the first two speakers here, and I can build off of that. So to answer that question, I just want to start and just give you a little bit of background of the center that I sit at. Again, it's the Center for Sustainability, Science and Strategy, CS3. There's a lot of S's in there, so we just say CS3. But it's also important to note that prior to that, we were known as the Joint Program in the Science and Policy Global Change. We've been around for a few decades, and our lab has been always sitting in this, you might even say, sort of academic research purgatory of working not only with federal agencies, but also trying to work with industries to get at the sorts of challenges that Sam articulated. And Parag, I'm so glad you mentioned insurance, because that's part of where my story's going to go, and I'll get there. Trust me, I will. But the only reason I bring that up is that you could argue that we've been at this for a few decades, and part of my answer really echoes what Sam has articulated, in that we're still working on this. It's still a very difficult barrier to bridge. But I will say this, from the experiences that I've been through at the lab since I've been there for about 22 years, one of the challenges is that when you're trying to develop a model like an integrated model, most of us tend to ask academic, scientific-oriented questions when we try to build a model. We don't ask investment questions, right? We don't ask impact questions necessarily. We ask scientific questions. So we build a model that tries to hit to try to answer those academic questions. Sitting in a lab that I sit in, when we have our meetings with some of our sponsors who are again in the industry, they are very impressed with our work, but they ask questions much like Lucia, you asked, is, okay, well, this is great, but how does this help me? And I think one of the ways that we've tried to facilitate that is to stop ourselves, ourselves as being a researcher and asking academic questions, and listen to the investment questions and ask ourselves, all of these models that we're building, what is it about them? Is there some nugget? It could be a variable, it could be a diagnostic. What is it from that modeling system that could maybe not completely answer that question, but at least give them something that's more directly relevant to what they're trying to assess and ultimately act upon? And one example I'll give that I think also underpins another difficulty here, kind of goes to your point, Parag, which is insurers and the reinsurance and insurance industry is probably one of the few industries that get it. They understand risk, they understand physical risks, they understand transition risks. They speak the same language, if you will, as I think many of you seen in this morning's sessions, the plenary talks, that spoke a lot about probabilistic forecasting and sort of building sort of a distribution of outcomes. And in the insurance industry, which is actually kind of really interesting, is that currently the real buzz is about the fact that there are many places in the US in particular and elsewhere in the world where property insurance is backing out. They're backing out of certain landscapes because it's just no longer financially viable. And so there's this jump in the investment side of that to short the market and to make profit off of that. And so from a climate risk, a physical risk perspective, there is that linkage. There's a real connection between what's going on in the climate, how that's changing the landscape of physical risks, and where you can find the opportunities. Now, to a scientist, to somebody who's actually asking about these academic questions, that's not necessarily in their wheelhouse, and it's not something that they're necessarily comfortable with asking, is how can I come up with a metric that makes money? Typically what they want to do is to understand, they want to deliver a discovery-driven piece of research rather than a delivery-driven piece of research. And I think one of the ways that we can really bridge this gap, and I know it may sound not very quantitative, but I think there's a real opportunity here to have these sorts of forums where we have academics and industry members talking together and building not only a knowledge base, but building a collaborative and mutually beneficial question base that allows us to develop diagnostics that are not only meaningful to the science, but answer questions in the investment landscapes. So.
Multi-collaborative environments and multi-stakeholder, let's say, partnership potentially. And linking to that, today, a cross question to all panelists. Today we've seen cutting-edge tools, AI model redefining damage functions, Earth observation platform, risk scoring for climate hotspot, but as a recent MIT report noted, over 90% of AI pilots fail. And often that's due to a lack of domain expertise and institutional alignment. So what's missing to ensure government and investment firm can fully leverage this AI insight? It is open data, it's better communication, better needs assessment, what the user needs, what you just mentioned. It is also enabling policy capacity building, or it's just a matter of time?
A combination of some of the things you mentioned, I think, are missing. Domain expertise and local knowledge are crucial. One of the things that we emphasized in our session this morning is that, again, averages in terms of global temperature rise and so forth aren't what's material in the ground reality of many places in the world, because some places are already well past or those extreme or are already at extreme levels of heat stress and the subsequent correlated phenomena in terms of climate damage. So looking very much at the local context matters a lot, and therefore fine-tuning these models in such a way that they're adapted to a given geography is absolutely essential. And that's whether you're looking at weather models or the climate models, and then, as we do, incorporating the adaptation features, because the ground truth of a given place, and this gets to Adam's point about bridging the scientific and academic questions with the real-world applications that policymakers and investors want. The ground truth of any given place is really its adaptation capacity and its resilience to climate stress and climate shock, not merely what the climate profile says. When we show investors in the UAE or users in the UAE our data, I think everyone knows in this country that it's hot. You're not telling anyone anything new. If you're not measuring the fact that there is a resilient electricity grid, that there's nuclear power, that there's air conditioning, that grid is reliable, and all of the other measures that are being undertaken by the municipality and so on, if you're not factoring those things in, you are miles away from the ground truth. That's number one. That's the local. Then at a regional scale, and this is where complex systems come in, there are anti-fragile effects in markets. Adam mentioned lack of insurance coverage in certain markets in the United States. That leads to losers, but also to winners, right? So similarly, because the UAE is relatively more adapted to climate risk, the same risk that affects much of the region, it will outperform in the future, right? Even though it's subject to the same risks. So again, to model reality, you have to actually simulate the behavioral market dynamics that emerge. So we've done this for the United States, and we're able to say, yes, XYZ markets in Florida will suffer, but adjacent to those are markets that are going to do much better, and they're not actually that far away. And an academic approach, a strictly kind of climate model-driven approach to looking at the implications of climate is what we would call actually the 1.0 models in terms of financial impacts, where people would say, well, you just have to sell Florida. They didn't account at all for human behavior and market behavior, right? Because in fact, there are places in Florida that will win. And so similarly, we have learned over the last several years of engaging in this discourse that people tar entire states or provinces or regions with a broad brush, and they say, oh, well, the Middle East will be unlivable. It's like, that's not true, because the adaptation capacity is so strong and invested in a country like this that it will wind up being, again, anti-fragile. And so these kinds of things, have to become more than just an academic parlor game. They have to translate into modeling these nonlinear economic effects. And that's difficult to do, again, but you at least need to design the scoring algorithms and the predictive algorithms in such a way that they can account for those phenomena occurring. And there have been very, very few studies, exceedingly few, that serve as baselines for that kind of analysis. And so we wind up just having to build them ourselves.
Thank you. Stan, your perspective.
Yeah, I would just perhaps like to add that I suppose what's surprised us, and I'm speaking for the Earth 2 effort here, it's just the rate of technology adoption by different domains. And by that I mean we had interactions with one of the leading climate risk modelers in the US. I won't describe who it is. I think they may be international even. But it was so surprising to learn that their models were based on pure statistics when AI is available, and that they were based on climate output that came from CMIP 5. They haven't even advanced to CMIP 6. All right. So, meanwhile, it just seems like certain domains in atmospheric sciences, for example, there's just a faster rate of adoption for these technologies, and I feel like there's not this uniformity of how we should all move forward. And we're still having discussions about how to readapt their infrastructure just to improve some of the models that go into their system. It seems the status quo that they've been accustomed to for so many years, it just slowed it to adapt. Thanks.
Thank you. And Adam, your thoughts.
Thanks. And again, I'm going to build off of my prior panelist comments. So Stan, you brought up a good point well, first I'll just say, it's hard to argue that any one of the points that you made is not contributing. I think they all do.
All of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. That's the easy answer. But I will just sort of make a couple points, maybe one sort of cautionary note, and it kind of relates to Stan's point, which was, this notion of open data. Open data has its very obvious benefits, but what it can also do is potentially lead to maybe somewhat dangerous areas of false precision or false accuracy, just because it's so freely available. And if folks are not familiar with maybe the intricacies of the data, it could lead to some dangerous outcomes. And I'll just say this, so, Stan, you brought up CMIP 5, and while CMIP 5 was scientifically a very useful and very important exercise, and CMIP 6 certainly is the update of that. One of perhaps the unsavory outcomes of CMIP 6 was, I'm sure many of you in the audience have heard this, is about the hot model controversy. And that in and of itself, it has its own scientific debate and dialogue. But in terms of sort of the open data issue of this, I think it does raise an important issue, again, which I talked about before, is this constant communication between academics, scientists, and just the investment community in general that are interested in using this data. There are some important aspects of any new open data source that continual dialogue is critical. I'll just add and reiterate my point earlier too, is that I think there's a real hidden opportunity here with proprietary data to get into the mix here. I know that adds a lot of layers of complexity and difficulty in terms of data usage agreements and the like, but I think there's a real untapped opportunity there. Certainly time. I know this has been brought up, I think, probably in all the breakout sessions and in the plenary sessions, is it's very easy to get caught up in the hype of all of this. It's very easy, and it's not surprising. It's very exciting when you see a lot of the advances that are coming up in AI, and just for me as a modeler, to be able to harvest the clear computation efficiency and advantages of using AI, I think is very exciting. But I think there is this issue of, I think we need to kind of walk before we run. I think there's a lot of understanding and the connections and the linkages that we've brought up that has still really yet to be pinned down, and for us to really begin to appreciate what model components and what aspects of our models and what aspects of our development can truly leverage off of AI.
Thank you, Adam. And we have 1.5 minutes left. So to wrap up, I want a quick closing thought from each of you. What's the one most critical step to move from climate prediction to policy and unlock better investment readiness in a warming world? Starting from Dr. Khanna.
Why don't we go in reverse order, just to mix things up?
Oh, okay.
So we'll go in reverse. I'll sound like a broken record. I'm just going to say communication, linkages and feedbacks between all of our model systems, and better defined metrics for investors.
Perfect. Dr. Posey?
Yes, I think there's advanced modeling development on both disciplines, the climate and the financial. I think it's the connectors to get to those impact models is missing. That needs work.
Thank you.
So 2 words, financial materiality, right? That's the name of the game for getting investors to move. This is the term that they themselves are finally starting to adopt, and it's being regulated, at least in some markets, that financial materiality be actively and credibly calculated. And then competition would be the other term, right? Because we see this among us. And it's not about competition because of that regulatory pressure, right? It's actually competition to have an outperforming portfolio. And the more you can demonstrate that there's actually obsolescence risk in investment portfolios because of climate, the more they have to take seriously, how to incorporate climate data in order to build a better performing portfolio in the future. So financial materiality, competition.
Thank you. Thank you to Parag, Stan, and Adam for your insight. And as we heard, the path from prediction to policy and from data to dollars requires more than just innovation. It takes alignment across science, policy, and finance expertises. So thank you, ADIA Lab climate science team, for brokering this important conversation. And I look forward to continuing this conversation beyond the symposium to help make AI and climate science more actionable for those shaping your shared future.
Thank
Please
you to
join
all
me.
our panelists.
Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Please join me in thanking our panelists and on a round of applause.
Of course. Thank you again to all our panelists for that engaging discussion and for closing our first day with such valuable perspectives on how AI can shape real-world climate action. That concludes day 1 of the ADIA Lab Symposium 2025. Please join us now for refreshments, networking, and the poster session, and take this opportunity to meet our researchers and students showcasing their work. We look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow morning as we continue the conversation with AI for health sciences. On behalf of the entire team at ADIA Lab, thank you all for joining us at day 1 of the ADIA Lab Symposium, and enjoy your evenings here in Abu Dhabi. Thank you all.